Good evening. Can you hear me? Good. My name's Peter Godwin, and I'm the president of PEN America. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 2014 PEN World Voices Festival. PEN America is the US branch of International PEN, the world's oldest literary and human rights organization, founded in 1921 in direct response to the ethnic and national divisions that exploded into the First World War. We are now the largest of 144 PEN centers across 104 countries, and throughout our history, we've played an essential role at the forefront of the struggle to oppose censorship and to defend the rights of readers and writers at home and abroad. Today, our 3,400 members include America's best writers, and we join in an unbroken literary link across 91 years to hold the torch once carried by such luminous members as W.H. Auden, James Baldwin, Robert Frost, and Allen Ginsberg, Langston Hughes, Norman Mailer, Arthur Miller, and Marianne Moore, Eugene O'Neill, Grace Paley, Susan Sontag, and John Steinbeck. They believed, as we too believe, in PEN's founding charter, which declares that literature knows no frontiers and must remain common currency among people in spite of political or international upheavals. PEN reaches out to the world and into diverse communities within this country through our distinctive programs: prison writing, children and young adult books, translation, literary awards, and our Freedom to Write advocacy. And of course, PEN's World Voices Festival, which gives wider exposure here in the US to writers from other cultures. You can find out more about what we do and why you should consider joining our ranks, and indeed what our acronym actually means, at pen.org. All of our programs promote literature at every level and are founded on our core belief that free expression is a crucial component of every healthy society. Thank you. Now, here to tell you more about the World Voices Festival is PEN's Executive Director, Suzanne Nossel.
Ten years ago, when the PEN World Voices Festival began, New York City was still coming out of shock. The US was immersed in two wars. The Abu Ghraib scandal broke on 60 Minutes exactly 10 years ago last night. PEN President Salman Rushdie said then that it had never been more important for a global dialogue to be fostered. Yet, one has a sense of things being shut down, of barriers being erected, of that dialogue being stifled precisely when we should be doing our best to amplify it. Salman didn't just see the problem, he set about to solve it. Harnessing the power of PEN, he invited writers, planned programs, and breathed life into the United States' only international literary festival. Fast forward 10 years. At one level, it can feel as though the barriers that once blocked dialogue across borders have disappeared. Cable TV, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter foster a 24/7 worldwide free-for-all. PEN's traditional work of defending persecuted writers has stepped up in the digital age. We're called upon to defend hundreds of writers who've joined this great global conversation, sometimes at their own peril. For threatened writers, the issue so often comes down to context. Words taken out of context, distorted, misunderstood, conflated, and morphed into reasons to hate, to fight, or to silence. In a world of rocketing texts and tweets, context, dialogue, and genuine understanding can evaporate in the ether. PEN World Voices is a face-to-face antidote to a world where we think, talk, and text too fast with too little time to listen and hear. We've hosted more than 1,500 writers from 80 countries speaking 56 different languages. like a Davos on the Hudson, except that people come here less to burnish their brands, cite a celebrity, or make a deal, than to cultivate a new intellectual companion, meet a literary legend, or unleash creative inspiration. As we celebrate 10 years, PEN has redoubled our commitment to this festival as a bulwark against a global culture of crossfire. We've recruited new participants, new resources, and new supporters. We've tied the festival more closely to PEN's free expression work, our membership, and organization. We're permanently indebted to Salman for building this pillar of PEN. We thank him for entrusting it to us and look forward to a second decade of dialogue, understanding, and inspiration that will make him as proud of us as we are of him. It's my pleasure to introduce the person who's made all of this possible, Festival Director Jakob Orsis.
Hello, everyone. Yes, as you heard, it started 10 years ago. 10 years ago, no one thought that it's going to last more than a few years. And here we are, 10 years after. International literary festivals don't really travel well in big cities, as you may know. They are too complex, too slow, too fragile for an insatiable urban setting. But Salman Rushdie thought otherwise, and he was right. He started this 10 years ago, and not only started it, founded it, but he also helped us to navigate the festival into what it is now, a lively and hopefully provocative literary event. Salman is here with us. He's going to be working as he's part of the lineup. And one housekeeping rule I have to announce. Noam Chomsky, who is going to read tonight, he has to leave at a certain point as he has another engagement. So please forgive him when he stands up and leaves the stage. So, well, we know how Noam is. On the Edge is the theme of this year's festival, and we decided to dedicate this evening, this reading, to On the Edge. When a year ago, with our team, we decided on this theme, it all immediately sounded evocative, but very hard to grasp. In fact, over the course of the year, I always had an issue how to explain it. It's because I'm not an English speaker, I thought, but also there was another reason. The term itself is ever-changing. Even over the course of the year, it's changed a lot. So I decided to write down a few lines as of today for the records, what really On the Edge entails. So for the records, as of April 27, 2014, On the Edge is a land of uncertainties. It's the world where every step counts, where we question everything. Everything is suspended, dangerous, and alarming. In this realm, we are on the edge of an infinitive cliff. Everything moves and crumbles. There is devastation, there is tangible anger, the feeling of loss, and always some urgency. But all this triggers some visceral energy. We alive, we hear, and very, very seldom, I have to repeat it again, very, very seldom, we experience some calm moments. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome On the Edge.
Evening. I'm the outgoing chairman of PEN World Voices. I thought 10 years was, you shouldn't really have a chairman for life. Something a little North Korean about that. I would have to start telling everybody to have the same haircut as me. Probably wrong. Anyway, it's been fun for 10 years, and thank you all for coming and making this work. I'm going to talk a little bit about my country of origin, about India. There's a general election underway in India right now. Because of the immense size of the country, it takes 6 weeks for everyone to vote. The election is largely fair, largely free. Voting is peaceful, incidents are few, and the result will be a trustworthy reflection of this gigantic electorate's will. On this electoral process rests India's claim to be the world's largest democracy. A proud claim, for it is harder for a poor country to be a free country. And the long civil uncertainties and frequent unfreedoms of the citizens of all India's neighbors to the north, east, west, and south make the Indian boast all the prouder. This, we can all agree, is good. But a democratic society is not simply one in which such a ballot takes place every 4 or 5 years. Democracy is more than mere majoritarianism. In a truly free democratic society, all citizens must feel free all the time, whether they end up on the winning or losing side in an election. Free to express themselves as they choose, free to worship or not worship as they please, free from danger and fear. If freedom of expression is under attack, if religious freedom is threatened, and if substantial parts of society live in physical fear for their safety, then such a society cannot be said to be a true democracy. In contemporary India, all these problems exist, and they're getting worse. The attack on literary, scholarly, and artistic freedoms has gathered force ever since the banning of my novel, The Satanic Verses, in 1988. Rohinton Mistri's acclaimed novel, Such a Long Journey, was attacked recently by members of the Hindu extremist party, the Shiv Sena, in Bombay, and Bombay University caved in and removed the book from the syllabus. A.K. Ramanujan's classic essay, The 300 Ramayanas, for decades the foundational text of Ramayana studies in Delhi University, was similarly attacked, and similarly the authorities cravenly succumbed and removed it from the syllabus. Not only was James Lane's study of the Maratha warrior king Shivaji, an icon of the Shiv Sena party, attacked and banned, but the great library of ancient texts in Pune, where Lane had done some of his research, was attacked and many ancient manuscripts destroyed. And most recently, the same fanatical Hindu, a person called Batra, who attacked Ramanujan's essay, brought an action against Wendy Doniger's important scholarly work, The Hindus, accusing her ludicrously and ungrammatically of being a woman hungry of sex. And instead of being laughed out of court, he succeeded in scaring the mighty Penguin Books into withdrawing the work. A gay artist, Balbir Krishan, was first threatened and then physically attacked in India's capital, New Delhi, accused of spreading homosexuality. The grand old man of Indian painting, Maqbool Fida Hussain, was driven out of India because of threats from Hindu goon squads who disliked his nude portraits of the Hindu goddess Saraswati, in spite of the long sculptural and artistic tradition from the most ancient times of depicting Indian goddesses heavily adorned with jewelry but very scantily clad. The wardrobe of the goddess Saraswati wouldn't take up much room. Episodes of this sort are multiplying, it seems, by the month, by the week, by the day almost, and the authorities have failed lamentably in their duty to protect free speech rights. In fact, politicians and police officials alike have repeatedly blamed the victims for being the troublemakers. The climate of fear that has consequently been created is such that, as some of the examples I've given show, the hooligans and censors' work is now often done for them by the collapse of those who ought to be free speech's defenders. Penguin Books, whose merger with Random House has created the world's largest and most powerful publisher, and who were prepared to defend my work back in 1988, this time gave in to Doniger's critics without so much as a fight. This already lamentable state of affairs looks likely to become much worse if, as seems probable, the election results bring to power the Hindu nationalist BJP, so that the highly divisive figure of Mr. Narendra Modi, accused of being responsible for an anti-Muslim pogrom in 2002 in the state of Gujarat, whose chief minister he was then and still is, a hardliner's hardliner, becomes India's next prime minister. Films dealing with the pogrom have been banned in Gujarat ever since the attacks. Already, the threats to free expression have begun to spread beyond the borders of the state of Gujarat. Siddharth Varadarajan, the editor of the distinguished English language daily The Hindu, was forced to resign recently because the paper's owners felt he wasn't pro-Modi enough. Soon afterwards, the caretaker of his apartment was beaten up in a Delhi street by thugs who told him, "Tell your boss to watch what he says on television." Sagarika Ghosh, a leading anchor of CNN's Indian affiliate, IBN, was ordered by her bosses to stop posting tweets critical of Mr. Modi. In response, she tweeted what many journalists are thinking. There is an evil out there, an evil which is stamping out all free speech and silencing independent journalists. Journalists unite. Nor are the threats limited to free expression. Modi's campaign manager, Amit Shah, delivered a speech in early April in the northern town of Muzaffarnagar, the site of sectarian strife last year. He described the elections as an opportunity to seek revenge against the Muslim minorities. Giriraj Singh, a senior leader of the BJP, said in an election rally in the northern state of Bihar that those opposing Mr. Modi would have no place in India. They will only find a place in Pakistan, he shouted. Praveen Togadia, one of the most senior of what I've come to think of as Modi's toadies, told his supporters to prevent Muslims from buying property in Hindu-majority neighborhoods in Gujarat. The writing is on the wall. A couple of weeks ago, the sculptor Anish Kapoor and I, along with several other Indian artists, academics, and intellectuals, signed an open letter worrying about Mr. Modi's rise to power. Since then, the attack on us in Indian social media has been relentless and paradoxically has validated our fears. We worried about the arrival of a bullying, intolerant new regime, and here are its early outriders, menacing, nasty, bile-spewing, vengeful, substituting ad hominem attacks for any real debate. There will not be less of this after a Modi victory. Mr. Modi's supporters point back to the ballot box. He will win, they say, because he's popular. And they are right. A disturbingly high percentage of the Indian electorate wants a strongman leader, is willing to turn a blind eye to his past misdeeds, even if those include genocide, believes that dissenting intellectuals should be put in their place, critical journalists should be muzzled, and artists should behave themselves. This willingness to bet the house on Modi's alleged economic genius, about which many commentators have doubts, and to risk everything that is beautiful about a free society, may indeed provide the wave which sweeps Mr. Modi to victory. It would be easy to say, then India will get the government it deserves. But all those who value what is being lost, all those who want a country free of fear, an open society, not a stifled one, all those Indians will get an India they don't deserve. Those who value the India for which Rabindranath Tagore yearned in his great poem, My Country Awake, will get an India that would have horrified the poet. Where the mind is without fear and the head held high, where knowledge is free, Tagore wrote in part, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my father, let my country awake. India is in danger of betraying the legacy of its founding fathers and greatest artists like Rabindranath Tagore. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I bring greetings from the bordering countries to Russia. When I was a kid, my Estonian family never watched TV. Not because they disliked TV shows, but because Soviet TV was pure zombie propaganda. Finland was my other homeland, and when we got back to Finland, after visiting my Estonian family, switching on the television was one of the first things we did. It was like opening a window, and I can still smell that moment when my lungs were filled with free air, though I wouldn't have used that word at the time, free. Calling Soviet reality not free wasn't something one ought to do if you wanted your family members to be able to keep on living behind the Iron Curtain. You learn the textbook of silence in that kind of society without even noticing it yourself. Yet it doesn't mean you wouldn't recognize the free world as a different and a better place if you just have the chance to live in it like I did. Nowadays, people supporting democratic values in Russia don't watch TV anymore, and some of them say the propaganda is worse than it was during the Soviet years. But you are not going to see people there rallying for free media. They are not allowed to. There hasn't ever been a tradition for free media, so the majority of the people don't actually even long for it. It doesn't mean they wouldn't choose that option if they ever had the chance to live in a country where freedom of expression is at least somehow established. After that, they might also storm to the barricades and defend that freedom no matter what. But there's no tradition for that, and the new order is going to make sure that it'll never occur in a large scale. Instead, Russia has another kind of tradition, silencing those who disagree with authorities. They also have a habit for propaganda and for brainwashing the masses, and they use this weapon during the war and during the peace constantly. The purpose is to create an alternative reality with a bunch of imaginary enemies, with the purpose to secure the power of the ruling class. Today, that class is FSB, topped by a small group of former KGB men. The imaginary reality is needed to justify their invasions and military expenses that are going to consume 33% of the state budget in the next 2 years, at the same time as most of the citizens are extremely poor. It's needed to prevent that truth comes to light, exposing their dirty money and corruption, the money they've robbed from the people, their chance for a better future, higher life expectancy, better health, better education, lower rates in sexually transmitted diseases. That fiction is also created to whitewash their own past in the KGB, and therefore they need to revive the Soviet Union and its heroes like Stalin, because otherwise they would be lost. The public face of this ruling circle is the president himself, a third-generation KGB man. The freedom of press became even more limited when Putin returned to presidency. The amount of counterintelligence has exploded. FSB has bigger budgets than ever, and the official state budget for propaganda is now sky high. No wonder these experts of psychological manipulation fooled you. For West, modern image of evil is Osama bin Laden, not a white, blue-eyed man wearing a suit and a tie. He and his cronies don't wear national costumes representing otherness. They don't look like terrorists. They are not Arabs, Muslims, or black. And that's why West was so certain they wanted to be like us. You never expected China to be that way, but Russia you were certain of, even though the signs of the opposite development have been visible for years. It wasn't until the invasion of Ukraine that the Eastern countries started to talk about Russia as an imperialistic country. It took all these years to get these definitions into Western discourse, even though Eastern European countries have been trying to get rid of colonialistic traces of Soviet Union for past 20 years, Russia actively harnessing this process. We on the eastern border of Russia have learned it takes ages to become a subject in the Western discourse, and therefore this Eastern European decolonization process haven't really got Western eyes. Even though Western countries understand that slavery is one of the reasons behind the problems many countries have in Africa, they expected Eastern Europe to become modern democracies in an instant. It's simply because the West didn't recognize the colonialistic nature of Soviet occupation, and due to that, it did not recognize the process when Russia returned to its practice. Naturally, those in power in Moscow are aware of this. They rely on Western ignorance, and they saw what happened to Germany after the Second World War. They knew the best thing to do was to deny the past atrocities, create an imaginary reality where bad things never existed, only glory to Stalin. In the West, we think we can create a better future by learning from mistakes we've made. In Russia, the policy is the opposite. And coming to terms with the past, in that way the process is interpreted in the West, is a sign of weakness. Guilt is not part of Russian new patriotism. On the contrary, history teaching is not to be based on facts, but on ideas rousing national pride, literally. It's based on ethnification and superiority of one ethnic group, Russians, and imperialism, which is now considered the only possible form of government. The West left this type of values behind ages ago, and that's another reason for Western blindness. The new Russian values are too opposite to our postmodern world. It's almost like looking back to Western imperialistic past, except that we wouldn't take that path anymore, or could you here imagine France certainly heading to conquer Africa? No, you wouldn't. And here lies the wisdom of KGB thinking. When lies are big enough, they'll always pass. When ideas are far enough from the Western understanding, they become invisible in the West. You can only identify ideas you recognize, and that's why you wouldn't have let Gestapo-trained men fool you. Thanks to the movies, thanks to books, thanks to German guilt and defeat, Gestapo is the historical symbol for evil you know. I say, a group of men, KGB men bluffed you because you can see more movies about CIA than KGB. You read more books related to CIA or Gestapo than KGB. It's not a symbol for evil for you, thanks to Russian policy of denying their past and closing archives. Therefore, you have believed their fiction, imitations of friendship and democracy, and welcomed their dirty money warmly, even though it made Western political decisions less independent. It's better late than never, but let the new Russia be a lesson for West of how important it is to come to terms with the past and condemn also past human rights crimes and hold organizations accountable for them. If that had been done to KGB, you wouldn't have trusted a government ruled by KGB men. Thank you.
When I hear the phrase "on the edge," the irresistible image is the proverbial lemmings marching resolutely to the cliff. For the first time in history, humans are now poised to destroy the prospects for decent existence and much of life. The rate of species destruction today is at about the level of 65 million years ago, when a major catastrophe, presumably a huge asteroid, ended the age of the dinosaurs, opening the way for mammals to proliferate. The difference is that today we are the asteroid, and the way will likely be opened to beetles and bacteria when we have concluded our work. Geologists, as I'm sure you know, break up the history of the planet into eras of relative stability. The Pleistocene, lasting several million years, was followed by the Holocene about 10,000 years ago, coinciding with the human invention of agriculture. Today, many geologists add a new epoch, the Anthropocene, beginning with the Industrial Revolution, which has radically changed the natural world. In the light of the pace of change, one hates to think when the next epoch will begin and what it'll be. One effect of the Anthropocene is the extraordinary rate of species extinction. Another is, of course, the threat to ourselves. No literate person can fail to be aware that we are facing a prospect of severe environmental disaster with effects that are already detectable and that might become dire within a few generations if current tendencies are not reversed. And that is not all. For the past 70 years, we've been living under the threat of instant and virtually total destruction at our own hands. Those familiar with the shocking record, which continues to the present, will find it hard to contest the conclusions of General Lee Butler. He's the last commander of the Strategic Air Command, which has responsibility for nuclear weapons. He writes that we have so far survived the nuclear age by some combination of skill, luck, and divine intervention, and I suspect the latter in greatest proportion. It's a near miracle that we have escaped destruction so far, and the longer we tempt fate, as we are doing now, the less likely it is that we can hope for divine intervention to perpetuate the miracle. We might wish to consider a remarkable paradox of the current issue. There are some who are devoting serious efforts to avert impending disaster. In the lead are the most oppressed segments of the global population, those considered to be the most backward and primitive. The indigenous societies of the world, First Nations in Canada, Aboriginals in Australia, tribal people in India, and many others throughout the world. In countries with influential indigenous populations, like Bolivia and Ecuador, there is now legislative recognition of rights of nature. The government of Ecuador actually proposed to leave their supplies of oil in the ground where they should be if the rich countries would provide them with development aid amounting to a small fraction of what they would sacrifice by not exploiting their oil resources. The rich countries refused. While indigenous people are trying to avert the disaster, in sharp contrast, the race toward the cliff is led by the most advanced, educated, wealthy, privileged societies of the world, primarily North America, United States and Canada. In the United States, there's now much exuberance about 100 years of energy independence as we become the Saudi Arabia of the next century. One might take a speech of President Obama's 2 years ago to be an eloquent death knell for the species. I'll quote him, he proclaimed with pride to ample applause that now under my administration, America is producing more oil today than at any time in the last 8 years. That's important to know. Over the last 3 years, I've directed my administration to open up millions of acres for gas and oil exploration across 23 different states. We're opening up more than 75% of our potential oil resources offshore. We've quadrupled the number of operating rigs to a record high. We've added enough new oil and gas pipeline to encircle the earth and then some. The applause tells us something important about our social and moral malaise. The president was speaking in Cushing, Oklahoma, known as an oil town, as he announced in greeting his appreciative audience. In fact, it is the oil town, described as the most significant trading hub for crude oil in North America. And industry profits are sure to be secured as producing more oil and gas here at home, in the president's words, will continue to be a critical part of energy strategy as the president promised. A few days ago, The New York Times had an energy supplement, 8 pages of mostly euphoria about the bright future for the United States, poised to be the world's greatest producer of fossil fuels. And missing from the 8 pages is any reflection of what kind of world we are exuberantly creating. In the moral calculus of currently prevailing state capitalism, the profits and bonuses in the next quarter greatly outweigh concern for the welfare of one's grandchildren, and since these are institutional maladies, they will not be easy to overcome. Thank you.
من أنت؟ من أنت؟ من تختار يا مهيار؟ أن اتجهت الله أو هاوية الشيطان؟ هاوية تذهب أو هاوية تجيء، والعالم اختيار. من أنت؟ من تختار يا مهيار؟ لا الله أختار ولا الشيطان، كلاهما جدار، كلاهما يغلق لي عيني. هل أبدل الجدار بالجدار؟ وحيرتي حيرة من يضيء، حيرة من يعرف كل شيء. كتبت هذه القصيدة منذ أكثر من نصف قرن، وتحديداً منذ 54 عاماً، لكي أوضح موقفي من الرؤية الدينية الوحدانية للإنسان والعالم. فهذه الرؤية هي كما أرى في أساس الأزمة الكونية الراهنة إنسانياً وحضارياً، ومع أنها جاءت بدعوى تحسين وضع الإنسان والفكر، فإن هذا الوضع ازداد على العكس سوءاً. بتعبير آخر، جاءت الوحدانية بوصفها حلاً، فأصبحت هي نفسها المشكلة. تنهض هذه الرؤية على القول إن النبوة فيها هي آخر النبوات، وإن الحقائق التي بلغتها هي الحقائق النهائية، لا حقائق بعدها. ويمكن القول تبعاً لذلك إن الله نفسه لم يعد لديه ما يقوله، لأنه أنزل كلامه الأخير على آخر أنبيائه. تاريخياً كانت الوحدانية في الممارسة تنويعاً على أسوأ ما في العالم القديم الذي سبقها: الطغيان والحروب والفساد، وأدى ذلك إلى تغييب الأبعاد الروحية الخاصة بالفرد الذي يهشس، وهذا حقه، بتدبير علاقته مع الغيب أو مع الألوهة. اليوم يحتاج الإنسان أكثر من أي وقت مضى إلى الخروج من ثقافة الرؤية الوحدانية أي الدينية، أي الخروج من الثقافة القائمة على ثنائية الله والشيطان، الخير والشر، وعلى ثنائية الطبيعة وما وراء الطبيعة، وعلى الخروج من ثقافة التسامح الدينية إلى ثقافة المساواة المدنية، ومن عالم منغلق ثابت إلى عالم منفتح ولا نهائي، من ثقافة إحياء الماضي إلى ثقافة ابتكار المستقبل. لقد أوصلتنا ثقافة الرؤية الوحدانية إلى عالم أرض المعنى فيه تجف والينابيع تبكي الغيوم. ألهو مع بلادي، ألمح مستقبلها آتياً في أهداب النعامة، أداعب تاريخها وأيامها وأسقط عليها صخرة وصاعقة، وفي الطرف الآخر من النهار أبدأ تاريخها. غريب عنكم أنا وفي الطرف الآخر، أسكن بلاداً خاصة بي، وفي النوم واليقظة أفتح برعماً وأعيش فيه. ثمة حاجة لأن يولد شيء ما، لذلك أفتح للبرق مغارات تحت جلدي وأبني أعشاشاً. ثمة حاجة لأن أعبر كالرعد في الشفاه الحزينة كالقش بين الحجر والخريف، بين المسام والبشرة، بين الفخذ والفخذ. لهذا أغني: تقدم يا شكلاً يليق باحتضارنا. لهذا أصرخ وأغني: من يعطينا أمومة الفضاء، من يغذينا بالموت. أتقدم صوب نفسي وصوب الأنقاض، تأخذني سكتة الفجيعة، قصير لأحيط بالأرض كالحبل، ولست حاداً كما ينبغي لأغوص في وجه التاريخ. تريدون أن أكون مثلكم، تطبخونني في قدر صلواتكم، تمزجونني بحساء العساكر وفلفل الطاغية، ثم تنصبونني خيمة للوالي وترفعون جمجمتي بيرقاً. يا موتي، مع ذلك أجري نحوك، أركض إليك. يفصلكم عنك بعد بحجم السراب. أهيج الضباع فيكم وأهيج الآلهة، أزرع فيكم الفتنة وأرضع الحمى، ثم أعلمكم أن تسيروا بلا دليل. إنني قطب في استواءاتكم وربيع يمشي، إنني ارتجاج في حناجركم وفي كلماتكم نزيف مني. تتقدمون كالبرص نحوي، أنا المربوط بترابكم، لكن لا شيء يجمع بيننا وكل شيء يفصلنا، فلأحترق وحيداً ولأعبر بينكم رمحاً من الضوء. لا أستطيع أن أحيا معكم، لا أستطيع أن أحيا إلا معكم. أنتم تموج في حواسي ولا مهرب لي منكم، لكن اصرخوا البحر البحر، لكن علقوا فوق عتباتكم خرج الشمس. افتحوا ذاكرتي، تبينوا وجهي تحت كلماتها وتبينوا حروفي. حين ترون الزبد ينسج لحمي والحجر سائلا في دمي، ترونني مغلق كجذع شجرة، حاضر ولا أقبض كالهواء. هكذا لا أستطيع أن أستسلم لكم. ولدت في محاجر الليلة، نشأت في مدار البروق، وأسكن بين الضوء والعشب. أعصف وأصحو، ألمع وأغيم، أمطر وأثلج. الساعات لغتي وبلادي النهار. الناس نيام، فإذا ماتوا انتبهوا، أو كما قيل: وأنتم نيام فإذا انتبهتم متم، أو كما سيقال أنتم وسخ على زجاج نوافذي، ويجب أن أمحوكم عن الصباح الآتي والخريطة التي ترسم نفسها. مع ذلك في أحشاء حمى تسهر عليكم، مع ذلك أنتظركم في صدف الليل على البحر، في تهادر اللجة، في الثقوب التي تملأ جبة الفلك، في العناب والأكاسيا، في الصنوبر والأرز، في بطانة الموج، في الملح. أنتظركم.
The words "on the edge" invite the question, the edge of what? The great American master who speaks to this question about the edge was Nathaniel Hawthorne. And he was the master because his imagination dwelled in the 17th century among the Puritans of colonial Massachusetts, who knew that the edge is theological. The edge is the line separating the godly from what lies beyond, which is the zone of Satan. You will recall Hawthorne's short story, Young Goodman Brown. Young Goodman Brown says goodbye to his wife and wanders away from Salem village into the forest on his way to attend a satanic mass. Only as the night grows darker, he discovers his own neighbors, one after another, likewise traipsing through the woods. The sages of the village, his own wife. It is shocking. He repents and calls on her to repent, and he passes out. And you will recall that when Goodman Brown returns to the village in the morning, he is horrified by everyone and by his own wife, and he lives the rest of his life immured in a gloom of moral solitude, which leads us to wonder whether Goodman Brown really did see a satanic event, or did he merely deceive himself into believing that he alone was above sin, which is to say, did he fall into sin himself, the sin of pride? It is satisfying to conclude that yes, Goodman Brown is the sinner and not the village, but Hawthorne is great because he knows that theology is a province of reality, and satanic evil does exist, and Goodman Brown may, in fact, be onto something, but we cannot be sure. We are on the edge. Everybody today understands that when we speak about events in the zone of practical affairs that are worthy of a phrase like satanic evil, we're bound to speak about Nazism. Everybody agrees that we speak about Nazism too much, and the search for political advantage being irresistible undoes the discussion, and really the topic ought to be retired. But it is not within our power to retire the topic. Nazism, then, what was it in the past? Nazism, the ism. It was the doctrine that you see in the movement's foundational text by the leader, the belief in a diabolical conspiracy, as documented or speciously documented in the literary hoax, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the conspiracy said to have been announced at a convention by Zion's leaders to dominate the world for nefarious purposes. And Nazism was the resistance that, even before the party came to power, got underway non-violently with calls for a boycott of businesses thought to be affiliated with the Zionist conspiracy, together with an academic boycott. This boycott, that having gotten started in Germany in the 1920s, has, in spreading to other places, Cairo by 1936, and then again Canada, and still more places, has never come to an end, not even for a day, more than 80 years of boycott. The continuities lead me to wonder if movements of this sort, devoted to diabolical conspiracy theories and a politics of slaughter, are confined to the past, and my question leads me to discern, or to think that I discern, here and there, amid the twilight, a series of popular mobilizations of our own time, which, like the Nazism of yore, invoke a supernatural anti-Zionism, and even go so far as to inscribe among their foundational writings citations to the phantasmagorical protocols. It is true that in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the oldest of these present-day movements, has fallen on dreadful times. And yet the Brotherhood's branch next door, in Gaza, Hamas, which invokes the protocols in its founding charter and even specifies in Article 7 the murder of the Jews, is right now far from being crushed. Hezbollah in Lebanon, which on these particulars shares the principles of Hamas and makes a point of announcing so to the world, has entered a golden age of military prowess, and thus to the Islamic Republic of Iran and to the Islamic Republic's allies, lamentably in Iraq, and even the Ba'ath Party clings to life, the Ba'ath whose founding doctrines draw visibly on the German sources of the 1930s and 40s. As it happens, none of these anti-Zionist movements of our own time has succeeded in putting its program into effect, but it may be that with, if I may stay with Hawthorne's vocabulary, satanic movements of this sort, the precise identity of the victims has always been a matter of indifference, so long as there are victims, and in numbers sufficiently large to comprise whole percentages of the population. In Syria right now, the Ba'ath has struck up an alliance with one faction of Islamists in order to war against still other factions of Islamists, and all of these warring Ba'ath and Islamists would agree, all of them, that the principal enemy is Zionism. The Syrian war is an extravaganza of anti-Zionism. It is just that because the Zionists themselves, the real-life Zionists, not the supernatural ones, are too well defended to attack, the anti-Zionists have ended up murdering one another and are right now slaughtering the entirely innocent general population, not to mention the moderate and secular rebels. These people have destroyed Syria. But let me ask, is it right to stay with my Hawthornian vocabulary, even in a playful spirit? Is it useful? The language, if I cling to it, does lead me to further observations. I think that along the forest path, I too see acquaintances hurrying to the infernal mass, where they will heap words of praise upon the anti-Zionist movements, not of the past, but of the present, where they will celebrate the anti-Zionists as left-wing or anti-imperialist or what have you. I think I see, the village sages, one or two of them, the grand professors. I even see people who, feeling themselves to be as spotless as the lamb, invite me to join them at the midnight boycott. But I do mean to ask if I am right. Hawthorne instructs me to stop and think. So I wonder, could it be that my several observations, far from clarifying anything, merely reflect a foolish sin of pride? I tally the evidence. To costume oneself in a ridiculous theological rhetoric from the 17th century, as I appear to have done if only in play, surely this is a way of withdrawing from the general discussion. And the invocation of Nazis, which is to say, a monstrous ideology, surely this is the sign of intellectual emptiness. It is so tiresome. It is in such bad taste. It is dismissible with a wave of the hand. Goodman Brown's lonely and well-deserved fate, then, the gloom of self-isolated pride. Yes, I dwell in fear of this fate. And yet, Hawthorne is the master, and that is because he also instructs us that we inhabit a twilight, otherwise known as the edge, where the simplicities disappear and where the same Goodman Brown, who may have isolated himself, has detected as well a few aspects of reality. And now, having enjoyed myself with Hawthorne and Nazis and forest paths, I yield this most peaceable and all-tolerant of podiums.
I'm going to give a satirist perspective to the challenges that confront us. But before I go ahead, I must say that I'm not standing here because I'm brave or I'm brilliant, but because so many people have died and have made it possible for me to stand here today. Journalists, writers, activists, and many more. We'll look at my contribution started with the beginning of the wind of change and the challenge of commenting from an African perspective. Now, we'll go through a series of drawings. I must warn you, they're quite controversial and they're quite rude. Now, this is a drawing of our former president, Daniel Arap Moi, who ruled the country for 24 years. And when he left the country, I suppose, as a satirist, I thought 24 years is a long time. And somebody needs to tell the population that this person is no longer the president of the country. Now, you have to understand that, in African perspective, that when you have a president for that many years, politics is everything and the president is everything. This is what followed. We had a president, and for the first time, we had the First Lady at State House. And in African parlance, when your wife has sat on you, it speaks volumes. In many African countries, when you talk of impunity, we tend to intellectualize it, but it's simple. Impunity normally starts from the bottom, from the top. And it's a drawing of our previous president, Mr. Kibaki. Kenya went through a crisis in 2008, which resulted into the country going through a coalition pact, which we all thought that's the panacea, that's going to save the country. And this was a demonstration of the president and the prime minister. Now, some of these drawings were never published in the newspaper that I work for, the Daily Nation, and simply because they were seen as too controversial. And so they were all published online. When we talk of impunity, and I warned you, yeah, the ruling class and the political elite in many African countries, they are the one mostly responsible, if you ask me. Now, there's a lot of a debate has been going around. Of course, we can all blame the West, and we can all blame IMF and so forth. But I like to take a very an introspective look. I like to take to look inward rather than outward. And quite frankly, I think what has ailed Africa has a lot to do with leadership. And so this is the drawing showing that, the political class, even after milking the cow, that was not enough. Of course, you all know that is Mr. Wolfowitz. Because Africa and the relation Africa has had with the international community, with the World Bank and the IMF, and rather the West in general, has been quite interesting over the years. And of course, when we all hear about aid, we all get excited, especially we in Africa. But little do we know that where does that aid really go? Because we all think that aid goes somewhere. But most of us, actually, we normally end up getting the tail. Well, and of course, we had a new chief at the IMF, Miss Lagarde. She will have to excuse me for that, but I think after many years of being abused, it is only fair that also Africa has to get its fair share. Now, countries like Zimbabwe, of course, because of the relation that it has had with the West, we've had a situation where inflation has been a big problem. And I think in Zimbabwe we had an issue where we ended up having a $5 billion note. And there was a lot of debate about how do we reduce the zeros to make sense of what's going on, obviously. And as a satirist, I like to put things in perspective in the sense that sometimes, yes, I think the race relation with Africa in the West is very interesting, especially when you're an African. And I think there are things that we don't like to talk about. There are things we don't want to say. But I suppose for a satirist, it is easier to say. Religious extremism and fanatism is one of the problems Africa has been grappling with. I know that probably this is not known. I was only trying to be gender sensitive. I suppose if male suicide bombers get 72 virgins, female suicide bombers are entitled to something. This appeared long before the Danish cartoons, and the reaction, as you may all guess, was not very good. We also have the issue of Africa is battling the issue of homosexuality, civil rights, and so forth. And what is a debate? Kenya has a very progressive, fairly progressive new constitution, but still minorities, gays and lesbians are not really, they don't get the fair share in the new constitution. And the argument in Africa is always that homosexuality is not African. And I always ask myself, what is African? Of course, again, radicalization is a problem that we are grappling with. Many African governments have resulted into the rule of gun, which actually has resulted, has not bore any fruits as far as that war is concerned. And you can see that, yes, I think radicalization has continued. In fact, it has gathered momentum in many African countries, Kenya, Tanzania, and many other countries. We have the situation in Central African Republic where actually it is Muslims killing Africans, killing Christians, and Christians killing Muslims, which is quite an interesting and ridiculous conflict. Kenya went through a crisis in 2008, and as a result of this, we have seen quite a huge effort to reverse the gains of freedom of expression, the gains of human rights, which have been gained tremendously during the last 10 years. And then, of course, there's an issue of ICC. If you are all aware that Kenya is going through, that we have the president and the vice president now facing charges and facing ICC in The Hague, which is a huge issue. And by the way, this parliament actually agreed to send these cases to The Hague. And as a result of that, we are now fighting to have these cases thrown away from The Hague. And we took our impunity to The Hague, rather our unity to The Hague, because as a country we are united, but then we are not talking of anything. We are not saying anything about the victims of the 2008, where Kenya, 1,000 and over 1,000 people died as a result of the conflict that we had. Of course, if you are talking of ICC, we would love also to see that net widen a little bit to include several characters not only African leaders, but it will be fair also to have certain characters. As I mentioned, that we have seen the gains of that civil society and the media have made over the years being reversed, and it's quite a dangerous situation, not for me or for my fellow writers and satirists, but also for the civil society and for Kenya and many other African countries. Africa and China, and I think this is a very, very interesting bit where we have seen China have come to Africa in a huge way, investing and signing all sorts of contracts with Africa. And the question has always, that has come at what price? There is a huge debate still going on. We are always talking about, the press freedom versus development. Which one is more important? And is Africa better off with China, or is Africa better off with the West? I think these are the debates that are going to go on for quite. And as a result of this, of course, when President Obama visited Africa recently with his wife, he was actually welcomed by the Chinese. And quite frankly, the Chinese in Africa, they're quite a lot. We have seen actually African countries now borrowing massively from China. Now, I have always questioned that, who is to pay for that? And a lot of us probably have forgotten that that's the same thing that Africa went through in the 70s, in the 80s, borrowing from the West. But because there is accessibility of money from China, there are very few questions that are being asked. And so we can always borrow from the Chinese proverbs that, a loan is not a gift, something that our president was told recently. Now, America and Africa, they have a GOA, which is Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which offers incentives for African business. But recently, probably a few years ago, when Mrs. Clinton visited Africa, he was very well reminded that while the floor was hers, the tiles are all from China. And of course, we have China and Africa, and especially in countries that are facing problems in Africa. This is not also discussed. I mean, we are facing the same situation in Sudan, whereas China is a big player in South Sudan, but yet China is saying nothing as far as South Sudan is concerned and the conflict is concerned. And I presume that they are saying something, it's just that we just don't understand them, quite frankly. And of course, when the Chinese are told to increase pressure, we just don't get it. This is a book that contains all those horrible cartoons.
Previously on Prison Break.
Open Cell A, another African gangster coming through.
Unafanya nini hapa kijana? Nani anachunga chama? Unafanya nini hapa?
Nani yeye alitaka tuende Hague. I mean pumbavu. Ona sasa.
Mimi nimwambie kijana. Mimi kijana ni namna gani?
Ndiyo, mimi nilitaka watu wapelekwe Hague, lakini ilikuwa watu wale wengine, sio mimi. Sasa nataka watu wapelekwe TJRC, yani Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission. Sasa hiyo ndio watu watusamehe. Tunataka tusamehewe kwanza hapa na Mr. Ocampo, turudishwe nyumbani tuende huko pia tukasamehewe, alafu tuendelee na campaign.
Me, I'm not supposed to be here. They must have made a computer error or human error or it was a typing error, some kind of a typing error.
Ngoja, typing error kitu gani?
Computer error.
Computer error kitu gani? Unaanza kusema mambo ya computer error hapa? Just because you made many error mistakes, alafu unaanza kuja hapo unataka kuambukiza watu computer error. Mimi mambo ya computer sijui. Haiwezekani. Sisi utatuambukiza hapa virus ya kompyuta hapa. Hii Ruto ni kausi. Italetea shida kwa chama. Yafaa mtu mzuri.
Hata kama ni kauzi, lakini mimi ni kauzi mdogo. Kuna kauzi mkubwa.
Wewe ni kijambazi tu. Hapana mtu ya Kristo.
Sasa nikipigania haki yetu, unasema nimekuwa kauzi.
Unaanza kusema mambo ya TGR. TGR
watu walipigana juu ya nini?
My father had a mzungu wife and maybe that God.
Sasa ona.
So maybe he's my brother also.
Mtoto ni babi.
Wewe kupitia chambers ya Nyayo. Lazima turoke.
Ndio sasa Raila, nakuulizaje? Wakati ulitoroka usiku ukienda Uganda, ulikuwa unatembea namna gani?
Wacha kama unakumbusha wakati wa Nyayo.
By the way, yuko wapi? Si yeye anafaa kukua hapa.
I'll be praying, praying for the second one to come to us. I'll be praying. Why can't I keep my mind off the 2015? I want you now. Why can't I keep my mind off the 2015? I want you now. Umbrella for my hand. Feeling like a damn with this gold on my neck. First lady. You got me no shaking, feel I want you now. Why can't I keep my mind off the 2015? I want you now. Drunk in power, I want you. Umbrella for my hand. Woke up in the villa saying how the hell this miracle happened. Why can't I keep my mind off the 2015? The last time I remember, private jet the leave Port Harcourt. In the year that one, they leave Port Harcourt, where they come from, so making no sense was still there. We're not going anywhere at all. With the words,
is the ish, if I do say so myself. Hold up, stroll from Yenagua all the way to this Asavilla. That time I alarm, they worry me, say I be deputy. No one knows I go come this far. If you see, waiting I see. Now I be the president. Hope you can handle this love. Sleeping downstairs, waking up upstairs. Keep the budget to one side, no time to think of my shoeless strive, no time. Yab me all you want. Abuse me like a gundamisi. In 2011 I vex, but now no time, baby, now I don't sing. We eat the cake, pass she, we eat the cake, pass she, eat nice. For y'all to reach these heights, you're gonna need good luck. 60 million votes, I'm nice. No vex again in this villa, your taxes is my breakfast. We living large, we did alright. See, I told you there's really no Allah. There was really never a problem from the start. I'm good luck. There's really nothing anybody can do about it. I'm blessed. It's in the name. Nigerians can knock their head all they want. I'm here. Nothing can be done. Bad guy supposed to be. I'm here now. Oh yeah, talk. What is it talk? Nothing they happen, Baba. Forget John Fnaiba for this place. I was sharing Two-Face, Baba.
Speaking from rage does not always let us see how rage carries sorrow and covers it over, so I cannot do it well, at least not this evening. How often is sorrow effectively shouted down by rage? How does it happen that sorrow can bring about the collapse of rage? Is there something to be learned about the sources of nonviolence from this particular power of grief to deflate rage of its destructiveness? Anne Carson asks, why does tragedy exist? And then answers, because you are full of rage, Why are you full of rage? Because you are full of grief. Ask a headhunter why he cuts off human heads. He'll say that rage impels him and rage is born of grief. The act of severing and tossing away the victim's head enables him to throw away all of his bereavements. Perhaps you think this does not apply to you, yet you recall the day your wife, driving you to your mother's funeral, turned left instead of right at the intersection, and you had to scream at her so loud other drivers turned to look. When you tore her head off and threw it out the window, they nodded, changed gears, drove away. End quote. The grief is unbearable, and from that unbearability, one kills, a killing that produces more grief. Have we yet figured out exactly how this works, the transition from unbearable grief to uncontrollable rage and destructiveness? Perhaps grief is imagined to end with violence, as if grief itself could be killed. Can we perhaps find one of the sources of nonviolence in the capacity to grieve, to stay with the unbearable loss without converting it into destruction? If we could bear our grief, would we be less inclined to strike back or strike out? And if the grief is unbearable, is there another way to live with it that is not the same as bearing it? We know the contours of this terrible circle: destroying to stop the unbearable grief, to bring an end to the unbearable, only to then redouble that loss by destroying again. Perhaps that destructive act is a way of announcing that what is unbearable is now someone else's problem, not mine. Here, you take this unbearable thing. Now it belongs to you. But has anyone ever stopped grieving by devastating another's life? What is the fantasy, the conceit at work in such an act? Perhaps the wager is that this I in destroying suddenly becomes pure action, finally rid of passivity and injurability, finally, that is, for a passing moment. Or perhaps in destroying, one insists that the rest of the world become mired in one's own sense of devastation. If the world is unlivable without those whom one has lost, perhaps there emerges a despairing form of egalitarianism, according to which everyone should suffer this devastation. The destructive acts born of unbearable grief are perhaps premised on the thought that with this loss, everything is already destroyed, so destroying becomes a redundancy, a ratification of what has already happened. But perhaps there is an effort to bring grief to a full stop through taking aim at the world in which such a grief is possible, rolling over into a form of destructiveness that furiously proliferates more loss, wantonly distributing the unbearable. Of course, what is unbearable is already more than what one can bear, so how can there be any more of that which is already too much? This terrible form of the ineffable is loosed upon the world in that furious form of grieving known as destructiveness. We may ask, is there a satisfaction in such destruction, or indeed a satisfaction to be found in war? Freud tells us that certain forms of destructiveness yield no pleasure, no satisfaction, but churn on in a nearly mechanical way, repeating without even any final satisfaction in revenge. And yet there are, as we know, sometimes terrible satisfactions in war, the kinds of satisfactions that must be resisted. Peace is only very occasionally a quiescent state. For the most part, it is a struggle against destructiveness, the practice of resisting the terrible satisfactions of war. So what is my plea? Do I counsel more grief? Do I think that an exponential increase in grief will produce less destructiveness in the world? No, I do not, if only because grief does not submit to mathematical measures. Grief is not just about registering the reality that someone or some group or some whole population is gone or nearly gone. It's not a straightforward process that comes to an end when a reality principle delivers its verdict. Yes, the one or ones you are grieving are definitively gone. And it does not even conclude when we find ourselves having more or less successfully incorporated a lost one into our psychic reality, our gestures, clothing, our ways of thinking, and modes of speech. Mourning has to do with yielding to an unwanted transformation, where neither the full shape nor the full import of that alteration can be known in advance. This transformative effect of losing always risks becoming a deformative effect. Whatever it is, it cannot be willed. It is a kind of undoing. One is hit by waves in the middle of the day, in the midst of a task, and everything stops. One falters, even falls. What is that wave that suddenly withdraws your gravity and your forward motion? That's something that takes hold of you and makes you stop and takes you down. Where does it come from? Does it have a name? What claims us at such moments when we are most emphatically not masters of ourselves and our motion? When we lose certain people, or when we are dispossessed from a place or a community, it may be that something about who we are suddenly flashes up, something that delineates the ties we have to others, that shows us that we are bound to one another, and that the bonds that compose us also do strand us, leave us uncomposed. If I lose you under the conditions in which who I am is bound up with you, then I not only mourn the loss, but I become inscrutable to myself, and this life unbearable. Who am I without you? I was not just over here and you over there, but the I was in the crossing, there with you, but also here. So I was already decentered, one might say, and that was precious. And yet, when we lose our ground. We are suddenly at risk of taking our own lives or the lives of others. Perhaps what I have lost on those occasions is precisely that sense that I can live without you, even if it turns out that I can live without that specific you that you happened to be. Even if I was surprised to find that I survived when survival was unthinkable. If I can and do live without you, it's only because I have not, as it were, lost the place of the you, the one to whom I address myself, the generalized addressee with whom I am already bound up in language, in a scene of address that is the linguistic condition of our survivability. This apostrophic you may be this you or that other one with another name, but maybe also some you I do not yet know at all, maybe even some vast set of yous, largely nameless, who nevertheless support both my gravity and my motion. And without you, that indefinite, promiscuous, and expansive pronoun, we are wrecked and we fall. A loss might seem utterly personal, private, isolating, but it also may furnish an unexpected concept of political community, even a premonition of a source of nonviolence. If the life that is mine is not originally or finally separable from yours, then the we who we are is not just a composite of you and me and all the others, but a set of relations of interdependency and passion. And these we cannot deny or destroy without refuting something fundamental about the social conditions of our living. What follows is an ethical injunction to preserve those bonds, even the wretched ones, which means precisely guarding against those forms of destructiveness that take away our lives and those of other living beings and the ecological conditions of life. In other words, before ever losing, we are lost in the other, lost without the other, but we never knew it as well as we do when we do actually lose. This being in thrall is one way of describing the social relations that have the power to sustain and to break us way before we enter into contracts that confirm that our relations are a result of our choice. We are already in the hands of the other, a thrilling and terrifying way to begin. We are from the start both done and undone by the other, and if we refuse this, we refuse passion, life, and loss. The lived form of that refusal is destruction. The lived form of its affirmation is nonviolence. Perhaps nonviolence is the difficult practice of letting rage collapse into grief, since then we stand the chance of knowing that we are bound up with others, such that who I am or who you are is this living relation that we sometimes lose. With great speed, we do sometimes drive away from the unbearable, or drive precisely into its clutches, or do both at once, not knowing how we move or with what consequence. It seems unbearable to be patient with unbearable loss, and yet that slowness, that impediment can be the condition for showing what we value, and even perhaps what steps to take to preserve what is left of what we love. Thank you.
In those weeks in Barcelona, in November 1975, as General Franco lay dying, you could be forgiven for believing that things were ordinary. Spain was on the edge, but there was no sign of this. Instead, there was a rumor that a gay bar had opened, and even a rumor of its name. It was called, I was told, El Elefante Blanco, or the white elephant, but no one knew where it was. In those weeks, news of where it might be or might have been seemed a pressing issue. As the old dictator lay dying, I was watching for signs, but the police on the street seemed casual at the beginning, watching out with no special attention or just chatting to each other. The streets themselves were empty or full in a normal way, depending on the time of day. It was all normal. A few nights a week I would go to a flat in Plaza Real and find that many other guys had come there too, but no one talked about politics. It would not have been cool to talk about politics then. People would have laughed at you or wondered what was wrong with you. Anyone young had shrugged politics off. Instead, the lights would be turned low in one of the rooms, maybe in two of the rooms, and maybe in all of the rooms, and guys would move into pairs and make out, and maybe there would be hashish and music, American music and jazz. And then when it was all over, some guy would do an imitation of a film star and everyone would laugh. As the dictator was gasping for life, it was a time of ease and jokes. Unless you were on your way to do military service, you had long hair and an attitude of insouciance, carelessness. You wanted to be amused, to be free to come and go, or maybe just come until you were hungry, and then drift away to find some food. If I had known how to examine things properly, I would have seen that private life then, as in any country on the edge, had taken on a rare intensity because there was no public life. Everyone had to create their own personal elefante blanco, in the absence of the real thing. And they did this with what seemed to me like style and subtlety, but maybe that came from habit. And they did it carefully without making it obvious how careful they were being. And they did it indoors. They made it seem natural. It was only later it occurred to me that this was an essential part of the edginess of that time. It is just what happens when the public realm becomes intolerable. Indoor space becomes rich. The outdoors unmentionable. In the absence of freedom of speech, there is muffled laughter and there are languorous orgasms. In the year that followed, information was on the edge. No one understood why the most vocal and prominent oppositions of the old regime were not on the demonstrations. Later we learned that they knew that democracy was coming anyway and coming soon. But the rest of us didn't know because no one listened to the radio or read the newspapers, but no one who worked for the press knew either. They were all locked into the old regime, or they were in a state of pure confusion. The police then attacked some demonstrations with ferocity, but by the spring or the autumn of 1976, they did this only sometimes. Other times, they stood by as though they wanted to protect us or make sure we took the correct route, or they held the traffic back so we could get by. After one march, the town hall put on a concert to entertain us. A potential rebellion was being rendered haphazard and harmless. But there were still moments when that was not clear. In one of the main squares on Sunday evenings, the Catalans did their demure and traditional dance, the sardana, which had been banned but was now legal. One evening, the police attacked the dancers with batons. No one knew why. Some days, for no reason, you could see the police by the busload blocking streets or standing in rows on the places where people walked at night. They could, as though they were actors, seem nervous, aggressive, on the edge too. Maybe they knew that their days of attacking people would soon be over and they wanted to get a last chance to play the part. Still, most people thought that the king, who had inherited power from the dictator, was an idiot, a puppet, a leftover figure who would try to impose Franco's legacy on a new generation. The king could not explain, because there was nowhere for him to do so, that he really meant to make Spain into a normal democracy. When he came to Barcelona and made a speech in Catalan, the public use of which had been banned by Franco, people laughed at his bad pronunciation. But no one I met thought it was significant that he had tried to speak the language at all. People were afraid to think or hope that such gestures might be significant. In the autumn of 1976, I noticed that the programs for the classical concerts in the main concert hall, publicly funded, were printed in Catalan only. It looked like an act of defiance. Only later did it become clear that it was part of an official plan, an official message. In the following year, I realized one night that there would not be another civil war or even a long continuation of state repression and dictatorship in Spain. It was a Saturday night in April 1977, and I was in a taxi when the news came on that the Communist Party had been legalized. The driver went crazy, beeping the horn of the car in joy, and the communist leaders, including La Pasionaria from the Civil War, who had been waiting in a Paris airport, flew into Madrid that night to cheering crowds. Later I would learn that these communist leaders had made a deal, promising to run for election if they were legalized and let into the country. But when they were banned, their power was both shadowy and enormous. It was the only real way you could oppose the regime in the last decade of its reign. Once the party was legal and normalized, its power faded in the new Spain. Someone had put thought into that. In that year, as edges dissolved, as edges lost their sharpness, as the periphery moved towards the center and the center gave way, people who had shrugged about politics became political. They became Catalan nationalists or socialists or communists. People who were gay became gay activists. I remember one day standing back to watch a march of the city's barmen who were threatening strike for better conditions. They were marching according to their affiliation. Different barmen unions, and then socialist barmen, communist barmen, fringe group barmen. And suddenly, I saw one of the guys from that apartment in Plaza Real, from the nights when the dictator was dying. As a barman, now he was marching with the communists, and he was raising his fist to the sky or towards the town hall or in the direction of authority. He was fired up with political fervor, as I had seen him fired up with something more personal and more private just 2 years earlier. He looked like the future. By then, after those years on the edge, we were sure, all of us, that the future had come and was likely to last. Slowly, we had reason to believe that our own time on the edge, like our youth, had come to an end. Slowly, we had been educated to read the signs.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this, the 10th edition of the Pen World Voices Festival is officially opened. You're going to have 45 other events during the week. Let me thank Salman, Rushdie, Adonis, Judith Butler, Sofi Oksanen, Noam, Chomsky, Paul Berman. What a lineup. Onward.